Madinah Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship, MILE.
First and foremost, thank you very much, Ali, for my introduction and handover, and good afternoon, everyone from the UK today. So, what we're going to talk about today is the challenges of leadership and what lessons we can learn from disaster. Now, of teamwork, leadership, communication, and fun. So over the course of the next 40 minutes or so, these 4 tenets have failed, where they've worked, and we'll also see what lessons we can take and apply in our own personal and professional lives. So first of all, a little about myself. My name's Adam Tuffnell. I've sailed dinghies and small boats from a very young age, which then led naturally to me becoming part of a round-the-world yacht race back in the year 2000, the wrong way. That's to say against the spin of the Earth. I've been involved in round-the-world crew training, so from that experience I was involved in the training of people that had never sailed before to prepare them for sailing around the world, both the right and the wrong way. I work as a professional skipper, and that means day in and day out I'm responsible for the safety and well-being of my clients over whom I have duty of care, and together we face the risk of serious injury or possibly death should I make a mistake or have an error of judgment. As a principal of a sailing school, it means that I was responsible for people fulfilling the role of professional skipper. My academic background is psychology and philosophy, which enables me to make some academic sense of the practical lessons I've picked up from my time at the water, which then naturally led to the sort of speaking and webinar role which I'm here talking to you today, development and training where we run programs both on the water and shore-based to develop around the theme of leadership, and finally, there's an illustration here of just how frightfully brave I am, of me hanging from a piece of rope on a fairly benign sea state on a warm and sunny day. Now, first of all, the BT Global Challenge. The BT Global Challenge is the moment when I first realized the importance of the 4 tenets: teamwork, leadership, communication, and fun. So, as I mentioned, it's a round-the-world boat race. So it started from Southampton in England. We then crossed the Atlantic to Boston, then from Boston down past Recife into Buenos Aires, from Buenos Aires down past the Falkland Islands, around Cape Horn, leaving Cape Horn to the right into the Southern Ocean, to the next stop in Wellington. And then from Wellington we crossed a smaller leg to Sydney. Then from Sydney, a long way from Sydney, south of Cape Llewellyn in Australia, north of Waypoint Delta, you can see there, which is around the Kerguelen Islands, a landmass owned by the French, into Cape Town. And then from Cape Town back across the equator into La Rochelle in France, and then just a couple of days short sprint back to Southampton. Now I've actually re-rendered a video which should play. Now the race itself, apart from going the wrong way, there are 2 other things that make it unique. The design is the same. The down to the number of teaspoons and the toolkits we carry on board, everything we have on board is the same. The only difference is the skipper and the crew. Now, the thing about the skipper and crew that makes them unique is the skipper is professional in that he's a professional sailor. He or she is a professional sailor and is obviously very experienced. And the crew are all amateurs and all paying to be there. So it's quite a challenge. So there's a short video now which I've re-rendered, which should play on your screens now. Okay, so hopefully from the video there you were able to sort of get an idea that it was quite cold and wet and fairly emotional at times. So that was the global challenge in terms of the global concept. What lessons did I personally learn? What did I actually take from the global challenge as an individual? And how did it affect and impact me in the formulation of the importance of these 4 tenets: teamwork, leadership, communication, and fun? Well, to start with, just some 36 hours after the start of the race, just as we were leaving Southampton, we were involved in a collision where we were struck by a Spanish fishing trawler. Now, on any day of the week, this is very, very bad, especially if you happen to be the person on the wheel when it happens. And unfortunately, I was the guy on the wheel when it happened. And the result of this was quite significant. It almost put us out of the race before we'd even really started. And the psychological impact it had on myself and my watch was really quite something else, in that we'd lost a lot of confidence and we were very, very shaken at the near catastrophe of the situation. Now, the person in charge, the skipper of the boat, he didn't scream and shout. There wasn't any retribution. The focus was purely on, are we okay? Can we carry on? And very much looking at rehabilitating each of the crew members into the roles they were doing, and not to be shaken up by the incident. There's a saying we have, leave it on the last wave. So when something happens, you deal with the problem and you just leave it behind and you carry on. And from a crew perspective, working under a leader, I realized just how important this strength was from the leader's perspective, not to be angry at the situation, but to maintain the focus on the desired outcome. So we carried on. Fortunately, we were able to carry on from the collision, and about a week and a half later, as we were just passing the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, you may or may not be aware of a book and a film called The Perfect Storm. Well, they had in the film 2 storms converging to make a hurricane. We had 3. Now, the one particular morning we had this hurricane, we were knocked down. And so what a knockdown is where the mast of the vessel, the mast of the yacht, which is all the sticky up bit, goes beneath the waterline. So effectively the yacht rotates upside down to about 125 degrees from vertical. Now, this is terrifying, absolutely terrifying. When we were knocked down, I was stood on deck just forward of the mast. And in practical terms, one minute you're standing on what is closest to deck and your own personal bit of land is, and the next you're swimming. It feels as if the boat's quite literally sunk from beneath your feet. It's absolutely terrifying experience. Now, of course, it's bad on deck, but it's even worse for those people down below, where anything that isn't bolted down becomes a projectile, and that obviously includes people. Now, the knockdown was part of a hurricane. Now, for something to be categorized as hurricane force winds, the wind needs to be in excess of 65 knots of wind. The highest wind speed I personally saw that day was 89 knots. In practical terms, it's over 110 miles an hour of wind. The sea state was absolutely massive, and it was one of the most inspiring and scary and terrifying experiences I've ever been through. And the reason this is relevant is it really became quite apparent that you simply could not do stuff on your own. You had to rely on the people around you, and you had to be a part of a team to simply get from one place of a boat to another, and to complete the jobs we needed to do to maintain the safety of the vessel. After the hurricane, we carried on, and about a week after that, approximately 6 days before we arrived in Boston, we had a medevac. A medevac is an abbreviation for medical evacuation. One of our crew was bent over, suddenly dropped down in significant agony, was holding their abdomen, and was crying out in absolute ear-splitting agony. It transpired that she had a perforated stomach ulcer. We quite quickly realized there was very little we could do for her on board, and that we had to get her lifted from the boat. Unfortunately, the Canadian Coast Guard were able to dispatch an aircraft and a cutter to facilitate the rescue. Now, the rescue itself was fairly seamless. That all went very, very well. What we didn't anticipate, what I didn't anticipate personally, was the impact this would have on us as a crew. We did lots of practice before we left. As part of the training was the process of medevac and the process of having a crew member from a helicopter lowered to the deck. So we were very good at the actual practical side of things, but what we'd significantly underestimated was the psychological and emotional impact this would have. So much so that all of the training I do today very much focuses on the feeling behind the actual situation. In the same way as someone might fall over the side of the boat, we know the practical side of things, but it's a case of, well, how can we actually, what's the feeling here? How can we process the feeling? How can we actually learn and actually deliver what we need to at critical times? And this is similar in the ways of business. When contracts fail, when deadlines aren't met, the feeling involved to actually bring things back on track is worth considering before it actually happens. So that's just highlights from leg one. The rest of the race we carried on with various more hurricanes and the Southern Ocean, and all of this was in the backdrop of extreme fatigue from just working day in and day out in a watch system where you're up for 4 hours and you go back to sleep for 4 hours. So you're up and down all of the time. You pick up injuries from spending time just at sea for extended times for extended periods of time. You just pick up collateral injuries, which again need to be managed. And then we had extremes from the Southern Ocean, where the bottom of South America and beneath South Africa and beneath Australia and beneath New Zealand, there's no landmass to stop the wind and the water whipping around the Earth in an easterly direction. So the sea states build, it's bitterly, bitterly cold, horrifically strong winds, very, very big sea states, and they're all traveling in an easterly direction, and we're going against this. So it's just a very long, hard, arduous experience lasting for weeks at a time. So we have the extremes of the Southern Ocean through to the absolute opposite being the calm humidity of the tropics as we were crossing the equator, where as in Saudi Arabia you'll be more familiar with the heat and the humidity than we are in the UK. And in the water crossing the sea, it was very, very humid. The boat was 72 foot long. There was no air conditioning, so the air was very hot and sticky. There was no breeze or wind to push the hot and sticky and the smell away. So you can find in this, effectively, this 72-foot steel coffin with very little respite whatsoever. And the pressures this put on us as individuals to get on and not to have fallout or conflict was quite something. So it's a very different set of challenges, but challenges nonetheless compared to the Southern Ocean. And at one point we even sighted a UFO. And if you have a look at the picture there's a picture of me with a UFO that we sighted in the background. Okay, so before we move on to the next section of this presentation, what have I learned? What have I taken from my time at sea and my time sailing around the world? It comes back to these 4 tenets: teamwork, leadership, communication, and fun. And these 4 tenets are absolutely fundamental in any team arena, be you battling oceans and bad weather systems or working in a business environment. It's finding the balance and the conscious management of the 4 tenets: teamwork, leadership, communication, and fun. Okay, so we're going to take a look now at where things have gone wrong in the context of each of these 4 tenets in turn. So where has it gone wrong? Well, the first instance we're going to look at here is a failing of teamwork in the disaster of the loss of the vessel, the Estonia. Now, the Estonia was a passenger ferry operating in the Baltic Sea. Now, the background to this particular disaster: at 0100, at 1 o'clock in the morning, in the midst of a Baltic storm, the vessel's master noted they were making very little progress forwards, and that the vessel had developed a very serious lateral roll. At 5 minutes past 1, a loud banging noise was reported. At 1:15, an engineer observed on a CCTV monitor a massive ingress of water, an unchecked ingress of water flowing onto the vessel. He did nothing with these observations. At 22 minutes past 1, the Estonia initiated distress traffic. At 29 minutes past 1, this distress traffic ceased, and at 1:50 in the morning, the Estonia disappeared from radar screens. So the official report found the following: the initiating cause was inadequate bow door monitoring, as mentioned by the engineer with his massive ingress of water, which he did nothing. We'll talk about that in a moment. There was inadequate experience and training. The officers of the watch, the people taking care of the minute-by-minute navigation of the vessel, were the 2nd and 4th officers. And between them, they only had 4 years' experience, only 4 years' experience, and neither of them had received formal storm training. What should you actually do? What tactics should you deploy in storm conditions? The crew were very tired. They operated a 14 days cycle, 14 days on, 14 days off. They were on day 13 of this cycle. So already the crew are thinking about being at home, being with their families, and perhaps not considering where they actually are in their immediate situation. There's ineffective man management. So when the time came to save lives, the officers failed to take control and manage the situation appropriately. And they also found there was a fundamental lack of safety training. Okay, so that's the official report, but we're looking in terms of the tenet of teamwork. How did the teamwork fail? What went wrong here? Well, what went wrong was the bridge and engineering. So you have two fundamentally important components, two really absolutely crucial departments aboard the boat simply not talking to each other. So you had the engineer assumed that the CCTV images he was looking at were being repeated on the bridge, and furthermore, that someone on the bridge was actually looking at these images. As a result, he chose to do nothing because of this assumption. In reality, the CCTV images simply weren't on the bridge, and there'd obviously be no guarantee that anyone would even be looking at them. So from a teamwork perspective, well, it failed. The bridge had no idea how engineering operated, and vice versa. Engineering simply didn't know these images weren't there and no one wasn't looking at them. So from a teamwork perspective, this failing of teamwork led to the loss of the Estonia. Leadership. So you may recognize the image at the bottom of the screen as the Costa Concordia. Now there's a short piece of audio which we're going to play, and it's an exchange between the Coast Guard and the captain of the Concordia at the time the distress is actually happening. Now what's important here is that we consider where is the leadership, when is the time for retribution, what is the objective being sought, and how well do they actually achieve this objective.
Schettino? Sì, ascolti Schettino. Ci sono persone intrappolate a bordo, adesso lei va con la sua scialuppa sotto l'ombura della nave, lato dritto. C'è una piccaggina. Lei sale su quella piccaggina e va a bordo della nave. Va a bordo della nave e mi viene a dire, mi riporta quante persone ci sono. È chiaro? Io sto registrando questa comunicazione, comandante Schettino. C'è gente che ascolti, c'è gente che sta scendendo dalla piccaggina di prova. Lei sulla piccaggina la percorre in tempo e verso, sale sulla nave e mi dice quante persone e che cosa hanno a bordo. Chiaro? Mi dice se ci sono bambini, donne o persone bisognose di assistenza. E mi dice il numero di ciascuna di queste categorie. È chiaro? Guardi Schettino che lei si è trovato forse locale, ma io lo porto veramente molto male, faccio passare il di qua.
Listen, Schettino. Perhaps you have saved yourself from the sea, but I will make you look very bad. I will make you pay for this. Damn it. Go back on board. So in this situation, who was the leader? Who should the leader have been? The exchange from the Coast Guard, does this sound like a remote manager in control, or does this sound like a remote manager panicking? When the first leader failed, when Schianetti, the captain of the vessel, failed, and the new leader, the Coast Guard, took control, what should the new person have done? What did he actually do? Well, what's so alarming is that at the time this exchange happened, people were actually drowning. People were falling from the ship into the sea, and people were actually drowning. The sole purpose at this time was to save lives. It wasn't for retribution. It wasn't for making threats. It wasn't for anything other than maintaining the safety and well-being of the passengers aboard that vessel. So, in terms of leadership, I would propose that both leaders failed in their role as leaders. Communication. Okay, we're going to take a step back from the maritime industry now and have a look at there's a plane crash that happened in the UK in the 80s. It's the Midlands plane crash, and basically what happened here is that whilst in flight, the cabin and the cockpit filled with smoke. And as this happened, the engines on the left-hand side of the aircraft were making abnormal noises with flames coming out of them. Now, everyone in the cabin, so all of the passengers and the cabin crew, were aware of this. The only two people that weren't aware of the funny noises and the smoke coming out of the left-hand side were the captain and the co-pilot in the cockpit. At the time this happened, they incorrectly diagnosed there being a fire in the right-hand side of the aircraft, the engine on the right-hand side. So they then followed the correct procedures to extinguish the fire. They cut the fuel supply off, they initiated the extinguishers to the engines on the right-hand side. They then made a tannoy announcement, basically saying, ladies and gentlemen, sorry about the smoke, it's obviously very scary. We're going to make an emergency landing at Midlands Airport. And not to worry, the engines on the left-hand side are perfectly good, and the aircraft's designed to fly using the engines from one wing. And not one person spoke up to actually say, hey chaps, are you sure about this? Because the engines on the right-hand side were working perfectly well, and the ones on the left were making funny noise with flames and smoke coming out. Are you really sure that you've got it right? And the consequence of no one speaking up is quite plain to see, in that the aircraft crashed several thousand yards short of the motorway, several thousand yards short of the runway, into the embankment of the motorway, killing nearly everyone on board. And the lesson we learn from this, well, the lesson we learn from this is very simple. Speak up. Okay, fun. So when I talk about fun in the context of teamwork, what do I mean? Well, what we're talking about is finding the balance, is finding the bits of glue that holds us together, the thing that makes us unique as a team, that we all contribute as individuals. We're finding the formality of the team environment with a sense of humanity. And the example we're going to give here is the mutiny on the Bounty, illustrated in the diagram there of the illustration. And what happened was, in the early hours of one morning, the captain of the vessel, one Captain Bligh, was set adrift by the lead mutineer and his first officer, one Mr. Christians. Now, the question we need to ask here is, at what point did Captain Bligh, at what point did the captain choose to become the victim of a mutiny? When did he decide to become the victim of a mutiny? Now, I would say he chose a long time earlier than the time when Mr. Christian set him adrift. He governed his relationship with his men. He governed that relationship in such a way there was no relationship. So when the threat appeared from his first officer, he didn't have an underlying relationship with his men to counter that threat. So he had nothing, no relationship, he had no bond with his men, and therefore the mutiny was able to be successful. And this works in exactly the same way that any enemy will seek to undermine grassroots confidence in leadership, be it in the battlefield, in the boardroom, or, given the right set of circumstances, from within your own team. This leadership, this management, this working closely with your people and having the relationship is absolutely crucial. Okay, so we're going to have a quick look at 3 maritime disasters now, and the Titanic, the Herald Free Enterprise, and the Estonia. We're going to have a quick look at them, and again, just see what lessons we can draw. So, the Titanic. Over 1,500 souls were lost in the freezing waters of the North Atlantic. What was the problem? Okay, the initiating cause was the timely sighting of an iceberg with enough time to take avoiding action. Contributing to this was the speed of the vessel, and considering the iceberg warnings, the bulkhead and the fact the ship's design was inadequate, and there was inexperience on board. Compounding causes: the evacuation plan was non-existent, the officers failed to take control, and the safety training was simply non-existent. Herald Free Enterprise. 190 people lost their lives here. Initiating cause: bow doors closure. The crew were tired. Contributing to loss of life was the fact that the life vests were locked. Compounding causes was the inadequate emergency procedures, and the investigation found that they were running a sloppy setup. the Estonia. Now I've put the Estonia back in, but for one very, very simple reason. This occurred 6 years after the Herald of Free Enterprise. And if we look at the report, bound oil monitoring, inadequate experience and training, crew fatigue, ineffective man management, and a lack of safety training. What's changed? How have we learned anything from here? And there's one additional slide I've put in recently, and that's this ferry that's been lost in South Korea. The body count is rising, and when we look at what we actually know, we know that there's the inexperience of the third officer, there was a lack of training, the crew were tired. So what lessons are we actually learning from any of these situations? Well, if you look at each of these disasters in the context of the 4 tenets, teamwork, leadership, communication, and fun, you can see how if it had been effective leadership, had there been strong communication, had there been team operating, had there been the informal channels of communication in and amongst the more formal ones, then these disasters may well have been a lot less, if disasters at all. We will never be able to design a ship, large or small, to withstand the impact of a rock or, indeed, an iceberg. What I'm saying here is, no matter how well prepared we are, things will always go wrong. They'll always, always go wrong. And this is why strong leadership is just so very, very important. Okay, some good news, something good. There's little point me sitting here today talking to you about the 4 tenets and where they've been failed and where things have gone wrong, if I can't give you an illustration of where things have worked. Where has it actually gone well? Well, I'm going to share with you today my own personal disaster of being on a boat that was sinking in the Atlantic Ocean. So the official report found the following. There was an uncontrolled ingress of water whilst we were 1,000 miles southwest of Ireland. We had over 55 knots of breeze, so nearly hurricane force, and for 3 days we were in survival conditions. Okay, what actually happened? What actually happened? Okay, so we were on a charter, a 21-day charter, leaving from southwest Ireland, the city of Cork, and we were going to return to Cork 21 days later. It's what's called a mile building exercise, where you have an inexperienced crew who basically jump aboard the boat with the skipper and mate, with myself and my executive officer, and they jump aboard and they come sailing with us, and we simply just get miles to give them experience for their qualifications. The qualification they were seeking was what we call a 0 to hero course. So from 0 experience to being fully qualified, or sort of a euphemism of being a hero. So we left we left Cork, and we spent some time zigzagging around the English Channel between the United Kingdom and France, and building up miles for the first 2/3 of this trip, of this 21 days. Now, the final push was we actually wanted to spend an extended amount of time actually at sea with the guys, with being in, getting some ocean miles in. And we were in Plymouth, which is in southwest England, and we left Plymouth, and the forecast wasn't great, but it was sustainable. So the forecast was from when we left, which was absolutely not a zephyr of wind, so no wind at all, building to gale force 8, which is some 40 knots, some 40 miles an hour of wind. And it was going to hold at a gale force 8 for 4 to 6 hours, and then decrease, change direction, and enable us to sail a relatively fast, comfortable, and fun trip back to Cork. Okay, what actually happened was we left, and the breeze, we headed west, got into into the actual ocean. So we crossed the abyssal plain, which is where the water goes from relatively shallow to just a couple of hundred of meters to several thousand meters to sort of several kilometers deep. And the breeze started to build as predicted, and it continued to build. So it built past the 8 into a force 9, into a force 10, into gusting near hurricane and occasionally hurricane force winds. Now, on the particular afternoon prior to the incident occurring, It was a Sunday. Now, I personally had been awake for some 36 hours because the mate had fallen and injured his back, and as a result, he was confined to his bunk, and we were giving him managing his pain and discomfort with medication, with pain meds. So I'd been awake for 36 hours, and then the one particular afternoon, I asked one of the crew. There was one guy who would never really was never quite part of the team and was always sort of withdrawing slightly. And I asked this member of the team to go down below and prepare dinner for everyone. Now, although the waves were very big and the boat was rolling, it's actually quite a privilege because you're down below in the warm and dry. You have several hours to prepare food for 18 people, 18 very hungry people who will absolutely appreciate all the effort you put in. So it's actually quite a cushy number. Now, this individual went down, and what he actually did was he went down below, prepared food for himself, and then put himself to his bunk. So he just went below, ate, and then went to sleep. This then meant the knock-on effect that the oncoming watch came up late, having not eaten. The off-going watch went down below and had nothing to eat. And energy and food is absolutely critical on board a boat. Absolutely key. It's the energy, it's the fuel that drives people to be able to do what's needed to carry on. So I went below to discover that the boat had been left in an absolute state down below. He'd cooked for himself and only cooked for himself, but he'd left the galley, the kitchen, covered in raw meats, in sauce, in oils. It was like a small bomb had gone off. And I woke the mate up and just expressed my dissatisfaction to the mate. And my mate, Paul, he got up and he said, look, you're very tired now, Adam, you need to get some sleep. So I got my head down to get some rest. And as I got my head down to get some rest, Paul then took over and arranged the cleanup of the galley and sort of was taking care of the safe navigation of the vessel. Now, a few hours after getting my head down, one of the crew kind of burst into my cabin, shook me awake, and was basically woke me up, shaking me, saying, "You're trying to kill us. You're trying to kill us all." And he was very, very scared. So I got up, I sat down with him, and I calmed him down and explained, look, in actual fact, we are in this together. I'm not trying to kill you because I'd obviously be trying to kill myself. So we sat down and calmed him down and explained that we were quite literally in the same boat. A few hours after that, the weather situation deteriorated further. So I got up and we put the boat into a survival mode, a state called Heave 2, where the boat will then weather the storm, as the saying goes. So the boat then would sit relatively happily, and it reduces the banging and it reduces the throwing around, and it is basically your survival mode. So I got my head back down to sleep after that, and then shortly after that, one of the crew came in and woke me up and said, "Hey, Skip, there's water coming in and it's up to my knees." So I jumped up, as obviously here in water is as high as your knees is a very good reason to be getting involved. And sure enough, water was flooding into the vessel a lot quicker than what we could get it out. So what then happened? Well, we were in quite a dire situation where I realized that we couldn't stop the water coming in, and now we couldn't actually, the pump we used to pump the water out, that then failed. So now we're in a situation where we had water coming in and no way to get it out. So the situation wasn't good for us. What did it look like? Well, in reality, it wasn't going to be the wind and water that was going to kill us. I realized in actual fact it was going to be the combination of these 5 factors. The fact, low morale. Everyone was extremely tired due to the storm conditions. Risk of sinking being a very politically correct way of describing the situation. Everybody was afraid, and due to the situation with hunger and the lack of food the night before, everyone was very, very hungry. So these 4 tenets, what do they do? How do they actually come through and save the day? Well, in practice, it wasn't me that solved the problem. on my own. It was the team that came together to solve the problem. From the communication, we created an environment on board to brainstorm, to have a free and open forum where there was no such thing as a silly idea. Everyone was able to communicate freely without fear of retribution. From a leadership perspective, I'd taken a hands-off managerial role where I was able to oversee each of the little teams. We had one team of people looking at where the water was coming from to try and plug the leak, and we had another team of people trying to get the stuff off the boat. And finally, fun. Well, what was the thing that actually brought it all together? It was just after 7:30 in the morning when I was considering phoning the rescue people to let them know that we were about to abandon ship. I looked around and realised that everybody was very scared. As I looked around and realised everyone was scared, and I said, "Guys, I'm really scared. I'm frightened." It went very quiet. You could have heard a pin drop. And I said, "You know what? What's even worse? I really regret missing the sea survival day where we looked at life rafts." It was a little joke, and it just did it. It was enough to offset the fear. And from that, we found a solution. I don't need to go into detail of what we actually did to solve the problem, other than to say, look, I'm still here today. Teamwork, leadership, communication, and fun. So if we leave with nothing else today, ladies and gentlemen, please leave with these 4 tenets: teamwork, leadership, communication, and fun. Teamwork, leadership, communication, fun. The balance of these 4 tenets might one day save your life, as they did mine. And finally, just some things to think about. The responsibility of followership within the team is that of the leader and not the followers. If one day you find yourself having to discipline one of your staff, then ask yourself, why did I choose to fail them? And finally, if one day as leader you look around and discover no one's following you, and ask yourself, why is that? Thank you very much. Ali.
I must say, very, very interesting experiences that you've shared today, and quite a learning for all of us. Folks, we are open for question and answers. You can either raise your hand to speak directly to Adam, or you can put your questions in the question box. I see there are some questions in the question box, so let me go straight. First question, Adam. What specific traits of leadership you consider are critical during the disaster, specifically the ones that you've experienced yourself?
From my own personal experience, it's the preparation. It's for the time the disaster happens, it's having done the preparation in advance. So there's as little thinking and decisions to be made as possible. So, for example, on the situation with the Atlantic, the fact that we'd already created a forum to have a free and open sort of communication style. So, I mean, I'd love to sit here today and say I saved the day, it was all me, I did it, but it simply wasn't. It was a combination of everyone coming together, and the only way we could do that was by having created the right forum and the right environment in the first place, and by very much talking about sort of having feelings, and by me sharing that I was scared and that I was afraid was really quite significant. As generally, if you're feeling scared or you're not sure, then the crew, your people around you will be feeling that as well. So I think a lot of it is about the preparation in advance to before the actual situation happens, and that's something that I look at personally in the leadership that I do today, and also in the training that we do both on and off the water. I think when the actual situation happens itself, I think it's about maintaining control as best you can. It's about maintaining the fact that you are scared and keeping that as a focus to come with solutions. I think fundamentally, if you don't have an answer and you don't know what to do as a leader, your job is not to provide the answers, but to facilitate the answers to come from the people around you that might well have the answer.
Another one. What conflicts normally occur during such situations of disasters, in particular while building consensus among the team members? And how should one manage such disagreements and conflicts while saving lives in parallel?
It's a very good question. The conflicts generally occur. I mean, if you take the guy, for example, that woke me up in the evening when he shook me awake. I mean, why was he? What was he doing? Now, with hindsight, and this is part of my academic background, I can look back at that and say, well, actually, I responded in a way where I could look at him and I could understand his feeling. What was he doing? What was he thinking? What was he feeling? And he was quite simply scared. He was scared, he was angry, and so in terms of conflict, it's about assessing the feeling. And I think from a leader, if you can understand the feelings of your people, that will empower you to lead them and, if necessary, manage them. So it's understanding the feelings of your people. In terms of actual conflicts, I think fear is often a driving force, which can lead to people being snappy or argumentative, communicating in a way that they wouldn't do normally. I think it just squarely comes back round to, as a leader, it's important to have an understanding and a balance for what that feeling of the crew is. And if you're feeling scared or if you're feeling apprehensive, share it. Let the people know. Let your people know that you're human as well. And in my experience, they will rally behind you even more, because they don't want to see you fail. They will do it for you, and they don't want to see you fail. So it's a big trust thing, I think, is really important.
Last question, a short one, a bit philosophical one. Do you believe crisis situations actually help in producing real leaders to come forward?
Without doubt. I think it is individuals will rise to certain circumstances, depending what the situation is and their comfort zone and their confidence. I've seen people who, throughout a lot of the training that we do, we design situations to put the delegates under a degree of stress, and where they need to find answers from within. And quite often you will find the situation where you have people that are perhaps quite quiet and introverted, who wouldn't normally be assertive enough to speak up. And then given the right set of circumstances, they will come out and they will deliver their views and often find the answers to the team. And I think, again, this comes back to having the environment created in the first place that enables that to happen. So a lot of it is in the situation of facilitating answers and facilitating solutions to the crisis. A lot of it comes back to, whilst you have the time before the situation unfolds and before it goes wrong, that's the time to build the relationship with the people, so they feel confident enough to come forward and to speak up. So yeah, I think crisis does potentially bring the best out in individuals to sort of lead from within, and I think to do that, it's quite important to have done your best to facilitate that in advance. Ali?
Thank you very much, Adam. That really brings us towards the end of the webinar. I would like to thank you on behalf of Mile for giving such a wonderful presentation and for sharing your life-saving experiences. This has been a marvelous experience for all of us to attend this webinar. Any concluding remarks that you would like to give?
I think preparation in terms of sharing with your team the feeling, assess where things can go wrong. So when you do your training, when you do your the lessons that we learn from the water are absolutely applicable to sort of the business situation. So you can, if contracts aren't going well, or if there's a proposal that's there that might fail, that a lot of effort's gone into, that might be awarded to a competitor, then assess that feeling in advance, and just simply don't be afraid to share the feelings with your people.
Once again, Adam, for this presentation and for your time. And all of those who participated in this webinar, folks, we are recording this webinar, which will be uploaded on Mile Community at community.mile.org. Allow me also to announce a quick announcement. We are having an upcoming program on healthcare organization. It's the second leadership program, high performance healthcare organizations. It's hpho.mile.org. that is being planned to be commenced on 1st of November 2014 in Madinah. We are open for enrollments. Please do visit hpho.mile.org. And with that note, I would like to end this webinar, so you all will be automatically dismissed out. So you all have a good day, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're calling from. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Madinah Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship, MILE.